Now, if you happen to have a child in your life, you have likely seen Frozen 2. If you don't have a child in life, you may have also seen this movie. But in that movie, we are reminded by Olaf that water has memory. And there's a scene where the water reshapes itself to tell the story of what happened to Anna and Elsa's parents who had died years before. Now, water doesn't exactly work just like that. But in preparing for today, I read an article on the Resonance Science website entitled Scientists Show That Water Has Memory. And in there it said, by examining individual drops of water at an incredibly high magnification, scientists were able to physically see that each droplet of water has its own individual microscopic pattern, each distinguishable from the next and uniquely beautiful. It went on to explain that a scientific experiment was carried out when a group of students were encouraged to obtain one drop of water from the same body of water, all at the same time. And through close examination of those individual drops, it was seen that each produced a different image. How cool is that? Now, I always knew that snowflakes were each unique, but each drop of water, too? Now, I guess it's not really a surprise, given that God's hand is at work in all of it. We like to say that each human is uniquely created by God, and I guess we can say each drop of water is uniquely created as well. So water has memory, it's unique. And couple that with the cool science fact that water is constantly changing form on our planet. From ocean to rain to being absorbed by a plant to being eaten by an animal. So I guess when my kids like to point out that the water we drink is actually dinosaur pee, I guess they're not really wrong. There's so many little factoids and stories associated with water. And I guess as a pastor, I get to tell you that my favorite use of water is baptism. We talked together with the kids about water and bathing. But in baptism, that water connects us. It reminds us every time we witness a baptism that God is pleased with us. That we are chosen and marked with love, as it said today in the Mark reading that we just heard about Jesus' baptism. Now, each of us likely has our own baptism stories, or perhaps you've witnessed a baptism that you remember. So I want you to turn to someone near you and tell those baptism stories to one another. We're not going to do it forever, but take a quick second, turn to somebody and talk with somebody about a baptism of yours or something you've seen. Have you all had a chance to tell your stories? I know we can talk for a long time. How many of you remember either you have a memory of or you know stories about your own baptisms? Yeah, you've got some memories about that. How many of you have seen a baptism and you could talk about those? Yeah, lots of those. Okay. So baptisms take place in lots of different places. We have lots of different memories. But those stories connect us, even though each one is unique. So water has memory. The water that has touched each of us in our baptism, if we take those science bits, could very well have been the water that touched Jesus when he was baptized by John. We don't know. It could have been the water that was in Mary as she carried Jesus. We don't know. It's kind of cool to think about. The water tells the story of our faith, like a thread holding us together. And I want to invite us to think about water as possibly a habit-building, faith-building tool in the coming weeks. So what would happen if every time you take a drink of water, you say to yourself, God is pleased with me? Every time. What would happen if every time you washed your hands, you remember that God forgives you of any mistakes you've made? Every time you wash your hands. What would happen if every time you watch the waves crashing at the ocean, you remember that God is with you? I venture to guess that we might remember God in and around us more if we couple that with how often we encounter water. Right? So figure out what you're going to try to remember. Don't try all three. That's too much. We don't want to overload us. Just one. Drinking your water and remembering that God is pleased with you. Every time you wash your hands, remember that God forgives you. Every time you see the ocean, remember that God is with you. Just pick one. Go ahead. Decide. You got it? Give it a try. And allow the water to remind you. Allow the water to give you life. Not just in the biology sense, but in the spirit sense as well. For life-giving water, we say thanks be to God. For this connection that ties us together, we say thanks be to God. Amen.